I wanted to talk about Joseph here today for a little bit, and particularly a phrase that comes up in connection with Joseph over and over again, the idea that the Lord was with him. And what exactly does that mean? Because Joseph, of course, we know largely because of his hardships, because of the difficulties, the pain, the suffering, the inequity that characterized Joseph's life, at least the first half or so of Joseph's life. And we have this tendency, I fear, to look at all of these biblical promises that are given to the faithful, promises of security and safety and blessing and all these wonderful things, including and especially things in this life. And we tend to think that when we don't get those things as we would have requested them in a timely fashion, in proper amount, etc., then somehow God has abandoned us, that God is not with us. Or if he is with us to the degree that he is with us, giving us these things that we have, that's not really what we're looking for. We wanted something else. And I'm sure Joseph could have, perhaps he did, say things along those lines when he was going through the difficulties, the challenges that he faced. We don't really have any information about Joseph's prayer life, but I suspect that he did pray, and if he did pray, then I suspect he asked for an awful lot of things he did not get. And yet we're told over and over again that the Lord was with him. A very similar expression, I think, probably put this in my mind in the first place with regard to the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where in his first imprisonment he says toward the end of the chapter that everyone had abandoned him, but the Lord was with him, he says there. And that confidence that he had not been abandoned despite the externals of the situation, that was what buoyed his spirits and kept him going and allowed him to keep faith alive in these moments. And I don't doubt that Joseph is a terrific example of that. And that by looking at how God is with Joseph in his difficulties, that can be an example for us in the modern day. Because, as I mentioned before, there are going to be times, spoiler alert, when you're going to feel like God is not with you. And in reality, the problem is going to be a perception problem on our part. Even if you are not in fellowship with God, even if you are not in compliance, if you have not put Jesus on in baptism, if you are living your life in abandon, in complete moral and doctrinal and behavioral abandon, God, there's a very real sense in which God has not abandoned you even. That he is still there with you, still beckoning you home, as it were. The Lord Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock in Revelation 3, verse 20. And such is the case, certainly for the most wayward of prodigals. But how much more so for the children of God, those ones who put their confidence in him, who believe, in fact, that he is not just with them in a general sense, in the sense that he sends rain on the just and the unjust and that sort of thing, but that he has a special place in his heart for his covenant people, and we are among those people. It may not seem that way in the moment, but it is that way. We're given that promise. So what I want to do is look at a few incidents from Joseph's life and how this phrase is used, mostly in the book of Genesis, but I'm going to begin by looking at Acts chapter 7, where Stephen tells a part of Joseph's story. In verse number 7, verse number 9 of chapter 7, the patriarchs, which is to say Joseph's older brothers, they became jealous of Joseph and sold him into Egypt, but God was with him and rescued him out of all his troubles. He gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who appointed him ruler over Egypt and over his whole household. Now, you and I might quibble over the idea of being rescued out of all of his troubles. He was, after all, still in a foreign land, still separated from his family, estranged from his father, who he thought loved him, and as far as he could tell, had abandoned him in this foreign land. So maybe that doesn't look like all your troubles being solved and being ministered to in your time of hardship. And maybe that's the phrase is being used accommodatively here a little bit, or maybe it's just looking big picture. Eventually, of course, he has his family restored to him. He has his father restored to him, etc. In any case, though, the main point that we're getting at here is that when his family had failed Joseph in the short term and in the moderate to long term, when his family was not there providing the kind of emotional and financial and political support that he had every reason to expect, even in that moment, God was with him. Now, you may call that small consolation. Maybe I would call that small consolation in the moment. Maybe Joseph did. But in the end, he realized that his relationship with God was the bigger issue. Now, maybe it took him 17 years to get to that point. But in any case, as troubles abound in this life, as our family continues to disappoint, and sorry to inform you about this, they will disappoint from time to time. Marriages will disappoint, parents will disappoint, children will disappoint. Any relationship with a human being is going to disappoint from time to time. That's just hardwired into our nature as human beings, I'm afraid. Both we as receivers and our fellow humans as givers. There's going to be problems. And when those problems come in the most nurturing and trustworthy, we thought anyway, nurturing and trustworthy relationships, it hurts that much more. No doubt it hurt for Joseph also. But God is with the people of God in those moments, and that should provide a tremendous amount of hope for us. Hope in the first place that the problem can get better. If you are blessed with a Christian family, then you have every reason to believe and expect that this will get better at some point in the future, and hopefully and prayerfully it will. That hope of restoration, the prodigal in fact coming home, etc., that is alive in us as we believe that people who know God, who love God and love their family, eventually will start acting like that. Now, sometimes it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But even in those moments, we have hope abiding in us in a grander sense, that if this life is in fact disappointing in this particular area, it's going to disappoint in other areas too, so don't get too despondent. And B, our real hope is not of this life anyway. Our real hope is with our spiritual family, and particularly our spiritual Father and his Son, Jesus Christ. That's where our real hope comes in. So if you happen to be in a situation that is less than ideal, and that's not even fair because we're all in less than ideal situations, I suppose, but if it is in despairing situations, if your family situation is crumbling, as it were, that you're not getting any or don't seem to be getting anyway, any of the kind of support and encouragement and love that you would expect, that you have come to expect from your physical family, that doesn't mean that God has quit on you. That's just another opportunity to lean even that much more into his arms and have that much more appreciation, that much more gratitude for what he is offering to us. Now let's talk about our culture in a larger sense. And going back to Genesis chapter 39, as the Joseph story resumes after a brief interlude in chapter 38, we meet up with Joseph in Egypt, and we're told there that he had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guards, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. Remember, his brothers sold him into slavery to the Ishmaelites. So that's pretty bad. But we're told in verse number 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. We have a lot of strong opinions in our nation these days about slavery and about our history with regard to slavery, the descendants of slaves and slave owners, etc. It's a very heated topic. I wouldn't want to try to do justice to that topic in this context here. But we can talk about slavery with regard to culture in a broader sort of sense, and not just American culture by any means, not just 19th century American culture, but the world at large has suffered from this form and many other forms of human oppression, systemic human oppression. Bad things happen to certain people just because of who they are and what they look like, where they came from, how much money they have, etc. These kind of things are part of human culture. And I don't mean to dismiss that. I don't mean to dismiss any particular manifestation of that, certainly not slavery. But I do want to emphasize that the culture that we are a part of is characterized largely by sin. Human associations, human affiliations depend on the value and the principles of human beings. And human beings have consistently fallen short throughout human history. Some, you might argue, some cultures more than other cultures, but in any regard, if you have God's values, and if you are expecting to be met with those values in your society, you're going to be grossly and horribly disappointed on a multitude of levels, some of which may seem absolutely catastrophic, may by carnal means measurements be absolutely catastrophic. But the Lord gave Joseph success in slavery. How could that possibly be? Surely any measure of success would begin with not being a slave anymore. God could have done that, obviously, and he chose not to do that for whatever reason. We find out later in the story part of why that was the case. I'm sure God, even in that situation, though, could have brought salvation to Joseph's family in some other way that didn't involve Joseph being enslaved to this foreign nation for an extended period of time. But God did what he did. And this is a reminder to us that we don't necessarily have to approve of God's plans or God's measures or God's timing or any such thing as that. We can have confidence that the success that we meet with in these unfortunate circumstances, these less than ideal circumstances, that can content us in the moment while we wait for greater things. After all, we're not trying to remake human culture at large. We're not capable of such a thing. What we're doing is we are doing the best we can here on earth while we wait for a different life, one that is not characterized by the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eye and the pride of life like our society is. What we can do while we wait is accept whatever form of success happens to come our way and give God the glory for that, show appreciation for that, delight in that, and not be ungrateful in our requests to God saying, yeah, well, thanks, I guess, but I really wanted this for my birthday, or I wanted this for my anniversary, or whatever it happens to be. We have very specific ideas sometimes about how God can fix our problems, fix our world, and many, many times, if not most times, he doesn't do it that way. But he will bring you success after a fashion. Can we find contentment with that? Paul says yes. From a jail cell, he writes that he has found the secret in Philippians chapter 4 of being content. And it basically is rooted in this idea of I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, verse 13 there. If we have a relationship with God through Jesus, if we truly have confidence that he's watching over us and guiding us and blessing us, then we have to believe that there is a way for us to take satisfaction and delight and purpose where we are when we are. We may not fully understand why. In fact, I probably would almost guarantee you won't fully understand why it happens to be this way, but you don't have to understand the why. You just have to understand the what and obviously the who, which is you. Do the best you can where you are, and God will bring you a measure of success, and that is something to give him praise and honor and service for. Let's go a little bit deeper into the story. In chapter 39 again, and later on, you know the story how he was accused by Potiphar's wife of sexual misconduct, which he was obviously not guilty of, but nevertheless, he gets thrown in jail. Well, an innocent person being incarcerated, who ever heard of such a thing? Well, unfortunately, we've all heard of such things, and sometimes it might seem that we get a raw deal, that we never really had a chance for a good deal. Certainly that's the case with Joseph here. He was never going to get a fair trial with regard to this. Potiphar may not even believe the charges, but what's he going to do? It's his wife's word against his slave's word. He's ultimately going to side with his wife. He has to, even if he doesn't believe it. And I'm not sure one way or the other whether he did believe. One way or the other, though, and I'm sure Joseph didn't especially care, he winds up in jail, right? This is not right. This is not good. Any government, we're told this in Romans chapter 13, the Apostle Paul says government is in place so as to protect good people and punish bad people. That's government's role. God holds governments accountable for that. That includes the Egyptian government here. Well, how can it be then that government would let us down like this? Well, I got bad news for you. Government's going to be letting you down a lot in this world, just like your society is going to do, just like your family is going to do. This is the way it works. In chapter 39, verse number 19, when his master, that is Joseph's master, heard the story that his wife told him, these are the things your slave did to me, he was furious and had him thrown into prison, furious with his wife, furious with Joseph, maybe both, who knows. Anyway, he had him thrown into prison where the king's prisoners were confined, so Joseph was there in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph. There it is again, verse number 21, and extended kindness to him. Kindness in prison, well, that must mean he gets let out pretty quick. No, it doesn't mean that. He does get let out eventually, of course, but not right away, by any means. God had work for him there in prison. He was granted favor with the prison warden. Verse number 21, the warden put the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority. He was responsible for everything that was done there, etc. So Joseph was a relatively important prisoner, just like he'd been a relatively important slave. He was a trustworthy servant. He was a trustworthy prisoner, etc. Well, that's fine, I guess, but I think it's safe to say Joseph would have preferred not to be a servant at all, not to be a prisoner at all. Bottom line is, here we are, suffering indignity, suffering injustice, suffering at the hands of a government that seems oftentimes to not really care whether we live or die. As a matter of fact, that is not usually the case. And I want to make sure I'm generalizing here and understand that I am generalizing. But the Bible teaches consistently, and our experience, I think, will teach this also, that when we act like Christians should act, when we act with the kind of character and integrity and honesty that Jesus teaches us to have, that Jesus himself had, that tends to be met in kind. Luke chapter 6, Jesus talks about this, about how when you don't, you're not a judgmental person, people tend not to judge you very much. When you are a generous person, people tend to meet that with generosity. It'll be given to you, shaken down, pressed together, overflowing. The blessings will fall into your bosom, the text says there. Those are generalities, those are proverbs, but that doesn't mean they're not true. They are true, and we know this to be true. When we behave ourselves, even in a wicked culture, even with circumstances that are horrific, to put it bluntly, oftentimes, maybe even most of the time, we're going to see that our good behavior, like Joseph's behavior, is going to be met with kindness, with respect, with honor even. Joseph's circumstance could have been a lot worse than it was. And no doubt if he had taken the kind of attitude that oftentimes we take with regard to our affliction, which probably doesn't measure up very well to Joseph's affliction, we're going to fly off the handle. We're going to insist on our rights. We're going to start burning things and breaking stuff and stealing and all of this until I get my way, until things straighten up. Well, I have no issue with protesting and trying to assert your rights. Joseph didn't have rights to assert, by the way, in this situation, so count your blessings. But even while we are asserting these privileges, these so-called privileges that we may have here, we still need to be showing kindness and respect and generosity, including, by the way, respect for the governmental officials that are put us in this position in the first place. The jailer could have figured out a way to let Joseph out. He didn't do that. Presumably he could have anyway. And instead he lets Joseph rot in prison for a few extra years. Joseph finds a way to prosper in those situations. And again, this is a lesson for us that instead of putting our trust in government to fix its little red wagon, or putting our confidence in culture to straighten up and quit being so obnoxious and hateful, etc., instead of insisting that our family come into compliance with our vision of what a family ought to be, instead we are grateful for what God has done for us, including what God has done for us in these particular relationships, and find a way to give him honor, give him praise, realize that in those moments God is with us. Because even though our family may fail us, and even though our culture may fail us, and even though our government may fail us, in fact, all those relationships ultimately will fail us to one degree or another. God will not fail us. That's what love does, right? Love never fails. In 1 Corinthians 13, verse 8, I think it is. Love never fails. Perfect love, God is love, means God is always going to be loving us. He's always going to be loving us in the best way. And Joseph comes to that conclusion essentially in so many words in chapter 41 and verse number 51 and 52. As he is settling himself in this new land, he finds a blessing there. He finds a wife there. He finds children there. We're told in verse 51, Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh and said, God has made me forget all my hardship and my whole family. You can look at that as being kind of despairing if you want to, and I've quit on my family. I guess this is going to have to be good enough or whatever, but I don't think you have to look at it that way. I think that he's basically saying, here in this foreign land, God has found a way to bless me with my firstborn child. His secondborn was named Ephraim, he says, and God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. This is where he's not being afflicted anymore, certainly not to that same degree, but he was always blessed, and now he's blessed even more with two sons that are going to be patriarchs in the nation of Israel eventually, generations after this is over. This is a reminder here that while the world continues to be suboptimal, while the world continues to disappoint, and maybe, in fact, never gives us the things that we think we need, the things that we think that we are entitled to. Of course, Joseph gets his life straightened out a little bit more than this later on. But even if we don't get that blessing, even if we toil in this land of affliction for the rest of our lives, God still continues to bless us and may very well bless us in a way that would not have been possible if we had gotten what we'd wanted in the first place. And we may find that this new blessing, this new relationship, is preferable to the old. You know, God does, after all, know what he's doing. God does know what is best for us. That doesn't always mean it's going to look best. I don't want to make any promises on God's behalf here. But Joseph's story tells us in so many words that when he takes something from us, when we are denied what we think we are due, what we expected, etc., and gives us something else instead that may in the moment seem absolutely awful, absolutely the opposite of what we wanted, even in those places, God is with us. And because God is with us, that gives us confidence that we can face whatever circumstances, whatever specifics may come along, knowing that he protects us, that he loves us, that he is blessing us, and guiding us ultimately toward a better reality. The best example of this, of course, of all, is in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, where we're told that this child was going to be born to a virgin, and he was going to be named Emmanuel, which means, you guessed it, God is with us. And Jesus being in the world for not just for 30 plus years, but for 2,000 years and more, being among us in the flesh and now in the spirit, this is a reminder to us that God is with us, continues to be with us, and will be with us as long as we determine to be with him. And that is a tremendous blessing, a tremendous encouragement to me. I hope that it can be to you as well, because there are going to be times when we're going to feel like Joseph. We're going to feel like Joseph had it good, in fact, because our trouble is just absolutely unprecedented. Nobody's ever suffered like I've suffered, etc. You read some of the Psalms, they absolutely read that way. And I don't know if that's somebody just getting carried away with themselves or speaking in an exaggerated tone to make a point or whatever. But generally speaking, the psalmists come back to the same point that I'm encouraging you to come to as well, realizing that however bad it is, God is with you, God is blessing you, and that you are safe and secure and blessed in the place that God has placed you. And one of these days, you're going to be in an even better place with an even better blessing. So thank you very much for following along. I hope that you can take a blessing of sorts from this lesson from Joseph's life. Remember that God is with you, and draw near to him as much and as often as consistently as you can, so that you can feel the presence of God in your life and appreciate the blessings that he's given to you now and the blessings that are coming to all of his people in eternity. Thank you very much for following along, and God bless.